Use. Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Okay. So welcome again to a session on Chubby, and as we saw about in the last session, some parts of what are the key differences between Zookeeper and Chubby. I really won't go in all details now, but I'll just highlight the very important ones. And the real difference between Chubby and Zookeeper were the three main points. One is the Chubby is just a distributed log service. That is very important here. And second, it has a very strict consistency. And third is the client library provides cache management in Chubby. So these are the three key um, points or the features of Chubby, which makes Chubby stand out from Zookeeper. And then we saw all about the design goals, interface, and common use cases, and what was the design rationale, and also saw something about the system architecture and what are the main components in this Chubby. So I would like to start from here and cover a brief about the system architecture. So in this Chubby, there are two main components. One is the Chubby library, which is a part of a client application, and this Chubby library is integrated into the client application. And this Chubby library is actually the key which actually communicates with the Chubby cell, and Chubby cell is like a cluster. So we have two things. One is the Chubby library, and then the Chubby cell or the Chubby cluster, and then the communication between both happens with the RPCs. So these are the three major components. And so the way the Chubby library communicates with the master and all those details, we'll just look here. And that is what some of the things also we talked briefly last time. So, but this was a place where we left the last session. And so here, if you, I'm slightly elaborating on the previous diagram. In this case, if you look, we have a single application here, and it has a Chubby library inside it, and there is a Chubby cell on the right side, and you see there are different five of these, the ones which are in circle. They are the five different replicas, and with one replica as a master, which is in colored yellow. So this is what a Chubby cell looks like. And so whenever the client wants to send a request to Chubby cell, it doesn't know where to send, right? So the way the interaction starts with, and if you look at this yellow arrows, the yellow arrows, and the first one, where this is the first interaction with the Chubby library will be to the DNS, because it needs to find out where is this Chubby cell, what he wants to talk to. So if you look at the, so this here in this case, it is trying to find this chubby.foo.com. So it might be some address, a domain address for this Chubby or the Chubby cell, and then it's converted from the domain object to IP address by the DNS. So that is the way it communicates with DNS. And then when it gets IP address saying, okay, this is what one of the, it actually DNS stores all the replica IP addresses, and it just returns one of the replica IP address. So whatever the replica IP address it has returned, so that will be the second that will be response, and that is what the second path or the step is. And then the third will be, it will actually go, Chubby library will take this and talk to that IP address. So in this case, it will talk to other replica, which is not a master, and it can directly talk to master also. If it, in case if it happens that it talks to non-master replica, so in that case, that replica will actually return the address of master, and that is what the fourth step will be. And when it returns the address of the master, then the Chubby library actually will, at the fifth step, will actually directly talk to the master and then establish a session. So in a nutshell, this is the system high level process, or maybe a step-by-step approach. So this is the way it happens. And now, so initially what happens and how, so there are different ways, right? One is you will have a service, and the whole architecture is a service-based architecture. So you will have first something like a service initialization, or maybe whenever the whole thing starts from beginning, and there is not the Chubby is the cell is also not into existence. So how does it start and how the service is initialized? So what happens is, so to start the service from scratch, all the replicas initially will elect a master. That has to be done, and that is done using a distributed consensus protocol like Paxos. In this case, the Paxos is used, and so the master, how does and how a particular replica becomes a master is it actually obtains votes from the majority of replicas, and plus also promises those replicas that it will remain a master for a certain amount of time. What then that is called as a master release. Okay, so and the leader election, the master election is very simple in this case, because it is using Paxos, so it will follow the same Paxos principle, whatever the way it wants to. So it will send all of them will send a request for voting and all that stuff. I think the way we discussed in the Paxos, right? So how a master leader election happens. So that state machine, the complete state transition of the whole thing is followed, and then a particular master is selected. Okay, but the master which is selected by the service for an application is different. Okay, so this is the master selection happening inside the Chubby. So these are two things, right? So one is the master election happening inside the Chubby will be based on the Paxos state transition diagram, okay, or that algorithm. And but when we are actually using the Chubby on the client side, and we have many of these replicas, and when we want to elect a leader on the client side, so at that time what the client does is they all the clients come together, and then they try to acquire a log, in one of the node in the Chubby. So that election is different than what is in the Praxis. Okay, so that is what we were discussing also earlier, right? Had it not been this way, so how would be the master election happening at the client side? It would be the same way with the Paxos, sort of the Paxos library, right? So it would still maintain that state transition and then elect a master, and then there will be the some complexities involved because it has many states, and if you have multiple components and every component has a replica, so you'll understand how much things you'll have to take care of when you're doing a master election or leader election, right? So but now it becomes very easy when we have a Chubby. So the Chubby actually, when he has its own master, the client application has to deal with only the master, right? So it just goes and writes at a particular node in a master, and then the leader is elected. So that is what the difference I want to highlight over here. So the master election inside a Chubby cell is different than the master election or the leader election which happens at the client side. Okay, and then here also when you are done, so that particular master, whatever it has been elected, which actually will store all its information in some persistent storage. So that is required, right, for that particular master metadata and all the stuff to be stored somewhere. So it is actually advertised to all the replicas, and then they can take it from there. So that is one way. And then now when after the service has started, so we'll have a client session established, right? So how does the client session establish? First of all, as we discussed here also, the client will actually talk to the DNS and find all the Chubby cell IP addresses. And this is done by the Chubby library. So the Chubby library knows how things how it has to follow all these steps. So the client application need not worry about it. He just has to initiate a client session, and then all these steps which you just shown in this yellow arrow, they are actually done and taken care by the Chubby library. So that becomes very standard. So a client application doesn't have to implement all these steps. Okay, so this is provided already by the Chubby library. And then when it goes to the DNS, then it requests for a master location. Then when it gets a master location, then it establishes a session with the master. Okay, And now this write request. So the way it establishes a session will be, it will write into a one particular node on a Chubby cell, and that particular node will have information about what that session is. Okay, so so all the replicas have to keep on getting to that location and understand what it is. So that also, whenever it is written to a master, the whenever a node is created, be a file or a directory, whatever that is, so that has to be still replicated to all the replicas, even though replicas major work doesn't involve anything about the read and write requests, but still whatever is stored over here in the master, it has to be replicated to all the replicas, and that is what is done. So the whenever a master is updated, that data is propagated to the majority replicas. Okay, so and then only it is acknowledged. So the majority replicas, it is sort of a quorum, but I don't think so they mention anything about like a quorum. So maybe I'm wrong there, but yeah. So sorry,
So ensuring, I think, is strict majority, right? This one, strict consistency that we were talking about yesterday or day before yesterday, right?
yeah.
I mean, right. So
Correct.
that's why, right?
Right. But yeah, the term actually, whether they use the quorum or not, because most of the time in distributed system, they use very specific terms for each and everything. But here it calls the majority replicas. So that is what it says here. And it's never said anywhere of a quorum. I don't know why they do that, but yeah, that is what it is. Right. Yeah. So, but it has to be a majority. So in this case, if it is 5, so 3 will be the majority, correct? So you cannot have 2 because that's not a majority.
It will be equal. N by 2 plus 1 place section.
Correct, correct. So you always have the one which is actually overlapping with the read and write request. So at least one of the replica has the latest information, something like that they call it, right? Yeah. So then that way it happens, and then only it is actually acknowledged to the write for the client, from the client. So that is what it says about how the write request is taken care over here. And for the read request, it is just satisfied the master, because the master will always have the updated information, right? So it can, whenever a read request comes, it will always come to the master. It's not going to go to any of the replicas. Even if it has to do it, it will always do it this way, even if it starts from scratch again. So the same process will happen as it's shown. It'll keep on looking for a master, and then when it gets a master, either it establishes session, or maybe it's reading or writing, something like that, right? So that always happens that way. And then the master will always return the read request also. Yeah. And then the third one will be like whenever the leader is, so all these requests, whenever we establish a session with a master, and that session will continue till the master doesn't fail. Okay. So always that, so now in this case, if we have established 333, so all the interaction will always go to 333 until 333 says that I'm no more a master, correct? So at that time, it will stop sending all the requests and wait for the master election to happen in the Chubby cell. And once that has happened again, then the Chubby cell again starts responding back, and to the new master. So that will happen in the failover. So how the failover is taken care of. So therefore, whenever it establishes a session, it will keep continuing, and also the session will remain for long. It's not going to be like every couple of seconds you will have a transition from one master to another. In some cases it might, but as far as possible it will remain, right? Because see what happens, even if a master fails over, in case if it dies down completely, then you look for all of these happening. I think it will take at least more than 30 seconds or so to elect a master. So therefore, you will still be unavailable during that time, isn't it? And so therefore, what Chubby says is Chubby still claims that it's high available, and how that availability is based on the Chubby library, which stores also the cache. So this client applications can still keep on talking to the cache because your cache is not invalidated. Okay, because you have not updated anything in the Chubby cell, so it means none of the values are changed in the Chubby cell. So whatever is in the cache is the latest information, correct? As far as what the Chubby goes to, so it is highly available from the cache data. So even if there is something to be updated at the time only the Chubby cell has gone down, the master has gone down, but that information won't be updated into the master because that request has failed, correct? So it will, for that request to process again, it has to wait for the master to come back or get re-elected, and then only again when the data is actually updated. So before the data getting updated, it will be actually this cache will be invalidated, and therefore you'll always get the latest values. Therefore you'll follow a strict consistency there. So that is what. Now the another thing about is a replica replacement. So what does a replica replacement means? So in this case, we are talking about only the master failures, right? So in here in the Chubby cell, the other replicas also might fail. And sometimes if the Chubby replica actually goes down and it doesn't come up for a long time, okay, so maybe the recovery may take some few hours or so. So then we need to actually find another machine because we cannot wait for the majority in this case, because the majority will be a problem in sometimes. So for that we need to get replace a particular replica which has failed with another machine from the fresh pool or the free pool, a fresh machine from the free pool. So that way, just go to that machine. So in this case, if this 555 fails, and if you want another machine and it IP is something like 666, so the way the process works is because that will be a completely fresh machine. It doesn't have the data and it's not updated like the master and the other replicas. So the way it actually does is uh, it is actually removed first of all that older replica which has failed, and then a fresh machine is started from the free pool, and the sort of bootstrapping is done by like the initial thing what it has to do is it has to run the log server binary. That is what that service has to be started, and then once that is started, still that replica is not recognized by the master. So before that, the replica has to do few steps. One is actually it has to update the DNS table with its own IP address. So it will replace the replica which has failed. That IP address is replaced with this current new IP address of this new replica, and also it starts updating its database. So the way it updates the database is first is it goes to the file server and starts getting whatever is there in the file server, all the data, and then also it tries to get its update from the active replicas. So these two process, they actually happen in parallel. So, and the reason is the more you do it parallel, it is always it actually comes to the master's state very quickly, right? So that is the reason it is done in that way. And second, so once those things are done, so once it is written, the IP address is written, so master will periodically poll the DNS. So that is one of the master task. It has to periodically poll the DNS to find any changes in the DNS. So especially for its own replicas and IP addresses and all that stuff, right? Or maybe the DNS is also down, something like that. So for that, when it is polling, it finds a new replica, and when it finds a new replica, so then so at that time, whenever it has to write, okay, or yeah, for the write, it has to propagate, right? So whenever it gets a write request, a master gets a write request, it will eventually send to all of them, and at this time, it will send to the new replica also, because when it was transitioning from 5, it had only 4 replicas. Now it recognizes we have a 5th one also. So then it actually adds that, and it sends a request to the new replica to get it replicate the data for the particular write request. And if the replica replicates whatever the data it has been sent and acknowledges the master, So master immediately recognizes it, and then he actually completes the whole transaction, saying, okay, this replica replacement is over, and so it is included, and so this new replica can be given a status to vote for a leader election in future. Okay, so this is what actually it says that it has completed the replica replacement. So that is also interesting way how they handle the replicas, even though the replicas are not so much into share what you say uh, for high what you say replication, right? So for high availability, even though the data on the replica is almost like a master because we wait for the strict consistency, but the replicas are not used for sharing the load for the reads also. In this case it could be, but I don't know why it's done, but there might be some reasons they are not doing it, because when it is actually when it is replicating the data from a master to the replicas, it might not in the transit, it might have some issues, and that is the thing I think they want to avoid that. So this is what actually the replica replacement and all the chubby system architecture on a high level looks like. Okay, any questions so far?
So whenever whenever fresh machine is added, it has to update its IP in the DNS, right? So that master will check like whether the new machine has been added to cluster or not, and then only it will send replicate its data over that machine, right?
Yeah, that's right. So that is the only way the master will understand a new replica has been added, and also when the new replica is added, so it can consider it for a sort of majority quorum or so when it wants to actually look for and get an acknowledge for return and acknowledge for a write request. So that is the way it actually looks for. And this is the way actually we discussed a bit about it last time, but just wanted to go it again in this because this is slightly important, and because this is the only whole basic architecture of the whole chubby, and that is what the workflow is, and other than we have the last will be about the leader election of the client, right? So that we might discuss later because that is covered many places. Earlier also we discussed a use case, but we'll discuss in future session also. Okay.
So basically for the availability, two things are there, right? One is like the replica and the other is the chubby cache, right? Which is present on the client side. Even if the master goes down, the client can read from the cache itself. So replica also plays an important role for the high availability of the system, right? Like if master fails, then client.
When a replica master fails, so then when we are electing a new replica, so it will always be updated. So you don't have to again update it to the new master. So therefore the replication is that is for sure. And therefore whenever it comes back, and it might have a transition for some 30 seconds or maybe lesser than that also, but during that it doesn't have to update itself because if it's in pair with the, or maybe like we discussed about in Kafka, that ISR nodes almost like that, if it is almost in sync with the master, then we don't have to update it, right? So we don't lose any time in that. So it's quickly the leader election happens very quickly, so there's no processing that is perfectly right. So that is one high availability, and second, the data is always available in the cache. Absolutely. So those are the two things which makes it high available. Yeah, go ahead.
So last time we had one doubt, right? Since it's a read heavy system, so the client should also read from the replicas. I mean, generally that we do, right, in DBs and all. If it's a read heavy system, we shard it, and based on the shard, they read it from the shards, right? But here,
We
read
don't
operation is only
do
done.
a shard here, I think so.
Yeah, here we don't do, yeah, but like typical DBs, I mean, if there are many reads, then we, replicate it so that traffic would be reduced on a particular.
Yeah, I agree in that case. But here, you don't have a huge data store. The data store is very small. It's basically for coordination, right? I think Zookeeper also, the
Okay,
sharding.
metadata.
Yeah. Yeah, so that is not the, but we were just looking at how high availability is at end. So one is this way, as you said, the cache, and as well as we have replicas, but the replicas, again, the question comes, why not read from the replicas, right? So, but that makes sense. But the only thing what I worry about is, so if a Chubby application sends a request, a write request to a master, and so when it is sent, it actually updates the master fine, but it has not returned that particular what data actually has been updated in the master. Oh, it returns only when the majority of the replicas have updated that value, isn't it? So there might be, when it is trying to also replicate to its replicas from the master, so at that time, if you get a read request for the same data, okay, because you modify the data, right? So if you get at that time, you might have what you say, conflicting information which is in the cache or in the uh, servers, right? Because see, the cache is, yeah, the cache will always be invalidated, so you won't have anything in the cache. So your reads will actually hit the, instead of master, if it is hitting another replica, so the master value will be slightly different than the replica value, because it's in transit, right? So all of the replicas are not updated. Yeah, they are not. So there might be some controversy in some cases, some conflict, and that is the reason they are trying to avoid it. That is what I would think. So therefore they are not going to the Zookeeper, and I think the way the Zookeeper does, actually it reads from the replicas, and it might be okay, or maybe it has slightly relaxed consistency. I understand, because all these cluster, they are located in the same data center. Only we have some cross data center cells, Chubby cells. In that case, they still try to have a quorum within a particular data center, right? So that will always usually happen, but only the ones which are far away may not be a part of the majority quorum. So data will always be replicated very quickly. But in case, in a very slightest, very corner case, if it happens, with the Zookeeper may be fine. It is okay to have some replication propagated a bit late, or sort of eventual consistency. But in this case, Chubby is very strict about that. It just wants to have a data which is updated to master, and when it commits, in this sense, when it commits, it means that it has acknowledged also. So when it acknowledges to the client, it means every client or every replica in a client application also should see the latest value. So that is why actually they might be avoiding that scenario. That is what I think. I think you got what I'm trying to make a point here, right?
Yeah. So basically, you're saying all the replicas might not be in sync, right? So if it tries to read from any other replica, and the information might be different in the client cache and other replica, right? So inconsistency would go for a toss.
Yeah, that's right. But here it actually invalidates the client cache, so the client cache it won't have that entry. So all those requests of the read will hit the server again. So, but if it doesn't hit a master, it hits another replica, and the replica has a different value than the master. Yeah, then that will be an inconsistent requirement. It won't be consistent. It won't be a strict consistent. So that is one way. Yeah, what you said is almost the same. Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And these paxos won't take much time to select a new cell, right? When the master goes down, within fraction of seconds, this algorithm will run and select a new leader, right? I mean,
It depends. No, leader election sometimes can take more time.
okay.
Yeah, because if the machine is down and then if some machine is coming up, so if you have in the Chubby cell also, if you have five, because you still have to have a majority, and most of the replicas also down at the same time, you have very small few replicas left to form a majority. You will wait for another few replicas to,
Join.
come up, yeah, join, and then it might. So if a particular machine is booting for some reason, so it will take at least 30 seconds to boot up. So in the worst case scenario, it might be a minute also. But yeah, as you say, it tries to do it, and that is the reason they say the 5 is very sufficient. It happens within couple of seconds, and that is what actually the average time will be, 2 to 3 seconds. But in worst case, it might go for long, and that is what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Hardware issues. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe yes, something with a replica. Yeah, you can say hardware issues. Yeah. Definitely not that GC pause, because GC pause actually it releases very quickly. It should not take that much time, right? So it might be only a hardware problem or a network failure. Yeah. Okay. So when we are done, okay, we have something in the chat. Okay, let's
Yeah,
say.
there was question I think Shubham was asking, like it was like, let's say now 5 nodes are there, right? If the master fails, then there will be 4 nodes.
Uh-huh.
So how will you decide the majority in that case? Because it will be equal, right? I think some ephemeral nodes comes into picture, right? Master will poll the DNS to see if any new node is added, and again it will become 5, and then
Yeah. So that is what the replica replacement will be if the master
exactly.
fails. Yeah. But the master fails in this case, it might be like because it master goes down for a GC pause or something. If it is not able to be a master, so at that time you'll start a master election, the Paxos, the way the Paxos does. So for that, in case if you are not able to meet the majority, then you'll have to wait for a replica replacement. That is one thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why master is polling every time DNS if some new replica has joined, right?
Yeah.
So that it will again have odd number and majority candidate.
Yeah. Okay, he's saying, Nick says that if you have 100 nodes, we are okay to lose some 49 nodes. Okay, so you have a free pool of always. Yeah, always you'll have a backup of free pool. And then those free pools are also, maybe they have some way to update them very quickly. They might have some stage of doing that. And that is the reason they might not face issues like being down for a longer time in the election. Yeah. So that might be a way to handle it. Yeah, that's good actually. It was actually discussed by you guys, right? Yeah, cool. Yeah. So now the next is about the file-based interface, or you can call the file, and how actually the nodes are everything represented. So what it talks about is typically, because it's a Unix file system interface which is being used, and if you look at the namespace, the way it is used in the a typical name, whatever you call in the Unix, to represent a file or a directory and the path and all that stuff. Same thing is being used here. So the first slash represents the root, and when we see ls, it means the locking service. And then when we have the second Chubby-II, whatever is in here, that actually represents the particular Chubby cell name. And so this name is actually needs to be resolved with the DNS to get an IP address. And other things like the path 1 and subpath 2, whatever is written here, they actually represent the the paths inside a particular Chubby cell. So this, if we come to Chubby-II, if this particular this Chubby cell itself, domain name is Chubby-II, and then if we have something like this path over here, the path 1 and subpath 2, so it might go in this master, and then from the root it will start with path 1 and subpath 2. So that will be actually a part of a master. Okay, so it will try to find these two paths. So path 1 will be a directory node, and subpath 1 also will be a directory node, or maybe it can be a file also. So based on whatever the configuration we are doing, so that will be a typical way to represent any of the nodes in a Chubby cell. So, and then it says that it uses special APIs to directly interact with all of these, means creating a node and all that stuff, or even the logs, or you use a file system interface. And the reason the file system interface is much better, it is because you don't have to write new tools, to browse all whatever is inside the file. because most of the tools for browsing and using the standard Unix based file system interface are easily available. So if we just plug in this particular driver, so you can this information directly flows, and then you can use most of the file system interface based these tools, right? So that becomes easier. But yeah, there are some caveats to that also, and that is what it says here. There won't be any support to move files, because if it's a storage based system, and if we have different paths, and if we think, okay, if I want to move particular file from one directory to another, that can be easily done, right? So but in this case, you'll have to restrict that movement, because you don't want to move, because these paths are actually whatever we are writing, they are for a specific client component, and then if you want to move one client component to another client component, it doesn't make sense, because that will actually defeat the whole purpose. And therefore in a storage engine it is fine, but in this case it doesn't. So therefore it says, even though we are it's supporting the file system interface, so it will actually block these particular functionalities or features. One is surely for moving the files, and also it talks about the path dependent permissions. So what it means is, whenever you are given permission on a top level directory, that actually is based on the hierarchy. It actually is percolated down to the subpath, and so the subpath will also enjoy that permissions, right? But in this case it says it should not be. It should be based on the the lowest subpath, whatever it is, or maybe on any path anywhere, whatever the permissions, they will be very strictly to that particular, limited to that particular node only. And that also makes sense in this case. We don't want to have all those permissions uh, in a blanket form that anyone can use it, and that also will have a problem. So, and also it says in the files and directories, the way we can establish some symbolic links on hard links, so that cannot be used here, because we don't want it's not going to be copied in two different places, right? Because if it is copied, then again you will have a problem, because then if it is used at two different places, then you won't have a good consistency. So that will again defeat the purpose of consistency. So that is also avoided. And yeah, the thing is about all the nodes, which are all the nodes can be either it will be a file or a directory. So they are collectively called as node. So they will be either a ephemeral node, or a means a permanent node, a ephemeral node. And everyone knows about ephemeral node. They are sort of temporary files created, and they will only live for that particular session. So they will be deleted if the client has not uh, if it was open for some time and it has no connection with it, so it might be deleted, right? So that is the ephemeral nodes are. And so any node, it can be so any node can be used as a log, and all of these logs are advisory logs, right? So any of the node can act as a reader writer log, and all of these are the advisory logs, and they are not the mandatory logs in this case. So advisory logs will, because the only thing why advisory works, because we want to hold these logs for a long time, and they will be held till the whole master is alive. So master will be alive in some cases for hours also, for sometimes days also. So the mandatory locks, you cannot keep them open for a longer time. You typically, it has to be lesser than a second. No? Okay, wait, sorry, my mic, I need to change its setting. Just give me a second, I'll come back. In the meantime, you can guys discuss. Yeah, sorry, I'm back. So that is what it means. So we do that advisory logs, and that is why it is used. And now it talks about the ACLs. So all nodes have this ACLs. The ACLs are the access control leads. So this act, it has it is used to control the reading, writing, or even the changing the ACL itself, right? So therefore, that is what the ACL. ACL is basically the permissions uh, for a particular directory or a particular file. So what are the permission levels for each and every file node, correct? So that actually is a part of the whole thing, and it is part of the file system also, but that is also supported here. And the ACL actually it's stored in a some place in a special directory, and it is stored as a file, right? So that is what the whole ACL things are about. If anyone wants to add anything here, yeah, please feel free to add, or any questions.
So these are the same ephemeral that also used to happen in Paxos, right? Whenever client used to connect, it used to create a node on his behalf and then used to talk to all the masters, right?
Yeah. They are all almost similar, everyone. Yeah.
Paxos.
Ephemeral node is a normal ephemeral node. Yes. But they're trying to make it very clear how a ephemeral node is being used. But if we actually try to go further now, and we see how actually the ephemeral node is handled to maintain a session, then it becomes more interesting also. Yeah, but it is the same thing. Okay, so now in this case, it says each node will have a metadata, right? So what are the metadatας actually? So it is basically more of a different types of numbers, right? So it talks about it is like monotonically increasing some 64-bit numbers, and that allows clients to detect changes very easily. Okay, so what are those? One is the instance number. So this is what all of these, the metadata will have all of these first 64-bit numbers. And I think along with this numbers, it will also have a checksum, okay, which is not over here, but it will have also a checksum. So client looking at the checksum can quickly understand if something has changed in the metadata of a particular node, isn't it? So it doesn't have to go for all these numbers and find out if they have changed. So that might be more quick. So if it's not changed, just go ahead, right? Because anything is changed, then it will generate an event. So that is what it is used for. Okay, so now when we talk about an instance number, so what is the instance number? It actually talks about this current node's instance number. And if this current node, whatever the name we have given, if it was created earlier, and we have a similar name node again here, so this instance number will be updated by 1, okay, then the previous one. So it will always be greater than the instance number of the previous node with the same name. That is what it talks about. So the way I look at it, whenever we create a node with the same name foo, and if we had already a foo node existing somewhere earlier, so that instance number, if it was 33, so this number will be 34 if it was exactly after that node. And
so will they maintain the instance number globally?
Instance number globally. Well, it is only for this one, right? So they might have a way to actually understand when actually we have a same nodes. So the master might be having a list. I don't see anywhere they have written it like that. Yeah, but that's a good question. Yeah. They have not mentioned it anywhere like that.
So for one election, like that this should be local, right? I mean, it's only valid for that particular election or for that particular cluster, right?
No, these are the nodes.
It should be local only, but the thing is, while trying to calculate, right, greater than the previous ones, means there should be some global access to know what is the highest. Then they could derive from that the local number.
Okay, so kind of.
Yeah, so in this case, yeah, that's very good point. That is not very clearly stated anywhere, and that looks different. So usually, what I would imagine, if we have, why would we name the same node? So someone is naming a same node. At least there might be coordination between them, between the clients. So there might be something like that, and they might know it. But what your question is, how does the master know about it? Because it might be created in some other directory, isn't it? So yeah, the master has to have a mapping. So maybe something like a symbolic link. I don't know.
Maybe they can use a timestamp based. So at that time it will be unique, right?
But then how does we? If it's a map, we can easily find out, right? It's already there. Yeah.
I mean, if we use the timestamp based, right? So we no need to worry because timestamp is always unique, right? So whenever they're trying to create, so at that time they create the instance based on the timestamp up to the millisecond or microsecond. So then that number would
Okay,
be.
so you are saying it's not a counter, it's a timestamp.
I'm just thinking that way.
Yeah, maybe. But then it is like for every node, it will have a different instance number. So it is always different. Okay, so you are saying that if that node is being used as just a name node, because in some cases we have those mutexes, name mutex and all that, right? It's globally they are recognized. So how it is recognized at the client side and how the different nodes actually understand it, it's the same one or a different one. So based on the name and how to differentiate that. Yeah, then in that case, if they look at the instance number, if it's a base timestamp, yeah, that might be one way. Sure, yeah.
Oh, okay. So here the instance number for the node you're saying, say we have a like 5 nodes. So each node have one instance number, right? For that you're saying?
Yes,
Yeah, yeah,
that's a unique.
yeah.
Every machine
So
will
in
have.
that way, yeah, I think that way the timestamp would be better,
Yeah.
or else, uh, I don't know. So
But
at the
then
time
they
of.
are not saying that it has to be updated based on the timestamps or time to take something like that. There's nothing saying. You just say the instant number has to be greater than this. Yeah, but
Yeah.
we can actually, visualize that way, and that actually helps. Correct. Yeah, that makes sense. So now the second is the content generation number. So the content generation number is again incremented. So if we have already a node created, we have saved some content in it. So that will be a one generation number. And then if we actually update some part of the content, then we actually update the generation number. So it might be like a version number for that particular content. So that is one thing. Second is the log generation number. So the log generation number, it increases when the node is transitioning from a free to hold. Whenever a particular client acquires a log and releases a log. So when he releases and the other client acquires it, so then it knows that this is a new lock acquired. So how many numbers of time a lock was acquired? So that is what the generation number is. So every time a client acquires a new a lock, then this generation number is incremented. So I think it keeps a count of how many times a particular lock was acquired. And I'm not sure it will do for the shared as well as the explicit mode. It might, right? It has to do for all, yeah. Okay, so if it is shared mode or if it's for the exclusive mode, right, it still has to update that, and then it keeps a count of how much time that lock was acquired.
Okay, so one question here. So you're
Uh-huh.
saying each node, right? So the node in the sense the server or the file system node within the server.
It's a file system node.
Oh, it's a file
So yeah,
system.
yeah. So now these things, whenever we have a master already elected by the Chubby cell, that is done by Paxos, right? So now we are talking about when a client application interacts with the Chubby cell, so it establishes a session. So that session, whatever it establishes, it creates a particular node in a file system, and that is what is the session. Okay, so that will be the ephemeral node what we are doing, and that metadata is about that ephemeral node or maybe a permanent node.
Mhm. Oh, okay, okay. So for that sense, I think it should not be a global actually. It should be local itself, all these numbers. So because he knows, right, the node itself, I mean, the server knows what node it has. For each node level, they can maintain counters. So that should be sequentially incrementing, I think. We no need to have timestamp based, I feel.
Yeah, that is true, but then if we have same name nodes, then in that instance number, how they are how the server maintains. Does the server do a bookkeeping, so much of micromanagement bookkeeping? It might be a lot of overhead, right? So
So
yeah.
no need to maintain. So the thing is, we will give the path, right? So within the path, if you travel, so the parent and then child, if you same name also, there's no issues because there's a path, right? It tells from that path, if you go, you will find the unique node under that. So in that, if you have like number of childs, for each child, they want to identify by using some incremental number. So what we've seen in the Zookeeper, right? If you have a lock underscore one, lock underscore two for the childs within a node. So that time maybe we could use this numbering.
Yeah, that is one thing. So what I was thinking, if he just worries more about the subpath one as a name,
Mhm.
unless it worries about the whole path, right? So in the whole path, if uh, if after path one we had subpath one, and for path one, and it went to sub, and then again it came back to subpath one. Okay, for some reason, for maybe some application demands that. So at that time, the instance number it might remember. That might be one way to look at it, because the server might be storing all these logs, and then it might be getting it. But if we are saying the subpath one is here, but if we had two of these paths, like instead of chubby path, subpath one, like this, and if we had something like this, okay, in this case, I had path 2, but my subpath 1 was also the same as this one, okay, is the first one. So in this case, whatever the instance number of what I'm having here, in this case, it was like 32. Okay, so here in this case, at least I will have more than 32, maybe 33 or 34. So, but even my path is different. So then my node names are the same. And I don't know why it would be so much important for them to identify that. But the way I look at it is, if we have a path one, the same thing like this, and then for some reasons my subpath one actually went away because of the session ended, and I had another subpath two, and then again I returned back with some other client saying I want a subpath one number. So at that time, so this, if you look at the whole path, it is the same as the previous one. Then you need to have different instance name numbers, because in the logs where it is stored, you need to identify how this has been changed, from subpath 1 to subpath 2, because there might be a different change, because here the whole metadata also might be completely different. So to just differentiate, there was a change in the complete session, or a new session added, and that it might be for some reason. So that time the instance number might be important to just differentiate it. That is what I think.
Oh, okay, so you're saying for the client, for the users, they can give whatever path they want, duplication names also, but we will take it internally by using the instance number to make it unique.
Right, right.
Okay, okay.
So I was trying to identify what will be the real instance number used, right? That is the thing also you were more focused on, isn't it? So why we have an instance number, and if we can do it the other ways, we either increment or give a timestamp, that is fine. But then who uses it and why it's so important? Because it is
Yeah.
over here, right? The metadata information. So
Mhm.
this might be one reason, I think. Yeah. But yeah, that is a valid point. But yeah, if I get more inputs, and if you guys find something, please share. Yeah. So that is cool. Yeah. So this is the ACL generation. And now we'll talk about the handles. So whenever a client opens a node, okay, it will get a handle. And that what happens for most of the file system, right? Whenever we interact with any file system, we actually try to open a file. So we will get a handle, and then the handle will contain lots of information. It's very important information. So in this case, this handle has all the information, and the first one is it says it has check digits, and the check digits is actually it will actually prevent from it actually has the file permissions at that time. This check digit checks all the file permission, whether the user is has what you say, the privilege or the permissions to access this particular file in whatever the mode it is, like the read or write, and whatever the mode it wants to open. And then only it will grant permission, and the handle will be returned. So that is what the check digits will always be there. So they are more of the file permissions or the node permissions, whatever you can call them. And it checks for the permission bits at the open time. So it also says, but not at each read and write, because file description cannot be forced. So it only does this when we are opening the node at the very first time. Okay, and then when we close it and again reopen, again at that time this check digits will be important. So it prevents client from creating or guessing handles. So full access control checks need be performed only when the handles are created. Yeah, so this will be only for handle. Handle is created only when we open or create a file, a node at that time, right? So that is one. Then we have a sequence number. Okay, the sequence number is used in the later portions of this one also. So the sequence number, it allows the master to tell whether a handle was generated by this current master or the previous master, because you might have a failover earlier by previous master, and that also has created this handle, and then a new master has come up and this information is still there. So if the sequence number is different, that it means that this is created by a new master, and the information what you have, if it was the sequence number was different, then you might take a different actions on that, right? So either you think that whatever the data you have a stale data, so that might be one way of identifying it. And
what is the sequence number associated with actually file?
Sequence number is still associated with the handle. So whenever you open a node, when we establish a session, so you will get a handle. So a handle will have this data. One is the check digits. So it is more of the file permissions. And the second is a sequence number. So sequence number is whenever, because anytime when a master actually, when it opens, a master is alive. So you get all the data, but then the master fails over, but the data is not changed. Okay, you still have the session maintained because the master comes back, the second master comes back, and your session continues because you still have those leases, everything, the master lease or the client lease, and then it can handle for that certain time. You can still be fine if you actually master drops down and some other master comes up within release. So nothing is actually interrupted. But only thing is it should know the sequence number. If it is different, it means that we have this particular request was for a previous master or for the new master, and then it might be a problem when you are ordering the messages, so whether we should accept that or not. So that was actually discussed in the sequencer also.
So you're saying sequence number with respect, I mean, the master wants the sequence number, and then that will be unique when the master changes.
Right. So for each master, it will be a unique. So if it was for a master, like say M1, and we had some number, maybe something like 001 initially, and then this sequence number will be used by all the requests. Whenever the client is sending a request, write request, okay, so it will use the sequence number to because most of the information in the handle will be used. So that will actually come back, and then whenever the requests are ordered, at that time the master will look at the sequence number, because if it has the same number of requests, similar requests, and which one is the previous one and which one is the later one, in order to not corrupt the data. So this sequence number becomes important, because sometimes it might happen you send a request and then the master fails. Okay, I'll just go to this diagram here so that will be more clear. So what it says is, if you have a client here like this and you have a master, so this client first actually sends a read request. Okay, so okay, maybe a request one, not a read request. So it gets a lock, okay, for a lock n, and then it gets an act. So it means the R1 request actually is been satisfied. So sorry, from the R1 actually is from the replica one or the master one, right? But then when it again
what
sends
is N actually here?
it's a lock. You
No,
just go pick up a lock in the master, and then if it is that way,
what is the value N here mean? N mean within the lock.
Within the log, it can be something, okay, so if you are actually trying to create a particular node, it might be some string or so. You can say that. So if
This
it
is
is
actually
trying,
path of the node.
yeah.
Or I think it could be which machine that I mean, which node, which cell in this Chubby cluster has been allocated to this log, that number could be, and no. Like there could be multiple cells, multiple machines are there within Chubby cell, right? So a client requested for something, some machine might have responded. So that number.
Well, okay, it will always be the master. So in the
Always
master,
the
you are
master,
creating
yeah.
a particular node, right? It's like file directory. So if we had this one, so if I am actually going for this log, if I have this whole name, I don't want to have the whole name, right? So just trying to take a shortcut here. So if we just represent this is n in this case, right?
So that n equal to instance number.
Yeah, it has to be instant, no? Because you're
Oh, okay,
trying to
got
do
it.
a request, right? So you get that log. So you're just actually holding a log. So what happens? You are actually storing the handle over here, right? So when you store the handle, then you use this handle, and then you are doing an update. Okay, so you're sending the same information back with the update. So update means you are writing something. Okay, so initially you write something. You are trying to create a node. Okay, and then when you create a node successful, you will get an okay. So you will return a handle. So when you get a handle, this handle information is again sent back when you are updating it. But at the time, your this particular what you say this one dies.
Client or R1 replica also.
It's not replica, but actually the master actually fails, right? So the master,
I think the one who was trying to get the log, he failed, right?
the maybe it's a request, but then okay, so it is okay. The client fails, the process may fail independently. Okay, so it says locking is a complex in the distributed system because communication is typically uncertain, and process may fail independently. Correct. So now if we have a particular process holding a lock, okay, and it issues a request R, but then it fails. So this R1 actually is a process. If you imagine, it's a client side process. It acquires the logs, and then when it is issuing a request, at that time it fails. Correct. But if it fails, but it has still sent this message to the master. Okay. But now it has failed. So then what happens? That particular for that log. Okay, so if that log is actually released because the session ended, because your client, whatever you had association with this particular and it failed, and your session ended, so then what will happen?
Session will
R2
not
comes.
end, right? Because the client is still alive, but only the process got killed. Process got died. So at that time, the session will be died.
Yeah, it will die. So there are two things, right? If you don't have a lease, okay, just imagine we don't have a lease in that case, right? So it will be just like you go and establish a session, and then if you are not giving a keep alive, you have to give a keep alive, right? To in order
Right.
for that session to continue. If you don't send a keep alive and then you die, means then you are holding log, but then the process dies. So at that time, if the process dies and you don't get a response from the keep alive, then what will happen is the session will end, and after the session end, at that time itself it is sending an update. Okay, means when it sends the update, then it dies. Okay, if you consider that way, here it doesn't die, but when it sends a write request, something like that, and then it dies. So this process dies, but then your this particular one, this packet is still in transit, and then because that node has died down, so you have another request or another process again claiming for the same lock. He gets the lock because for that the session is over, so it can easily create a lock of the same name, and then it will get. So when it gets, but at the last again after some time you get the same update because of the network delays, you get the same packet and it wants to update that particular value. So at that time what will happen? You are getting a request from a client process which is not into existence, and then if you still allow to update, then there will be a data inconsistency. Okay, so that is why they say the sequencers are important, because when you get a lock n year, at that time you will have a sequence number. You are updating this n with the older sequence number. And then when you get a lock, same lock with the same name by the second client process, okay, at that time the sequence number will be different. Okay, so if the sequence number here is greater, then it is fine. But if you get this request which has a older previous sequence number which is lower, at that time it says you discard this particular request. So that way you are not actually messing with the corruption or the inconsistency of the data. So that is why the sequencer number is more important. So sequence number is more important. Sequencer is actually the way the service handles it, and therefore it is called a sequencer. So therefore the sequence number is more important, and that is the way it is used. So whenever we get a log, you actually also get a sequence number, and then that is more helpful.
Can I ask a question here? If all our sessions are connected to master, yeah, and we discussed that master can fails, yeah, does it mean that all our session will be breaked, will be fails as well?
No, it won't fail. See, I'll just show you another diagram. So that is very complex. I will cover that later also. But yeah, if you have come with the same, what will happen? Now if you look at here in this case, we have an old master here, and then a new master here. So whenever you have an old master, it is running till this point where you see this dotted lines. So you have a client list. So these are all the client, okay, and these are the master, okay, on the top one. So when a client is coming, so it will always, whenever it first establishes a connection or a session with the old master, it will get a lease. So this will be the master lease. Okay. So, and then at the time when the master is about to expire, this lease is about to expire, it will send a keep. So this is a keep ally which is going up. And then the keep ally will be held by the master, and the master will hold the keep alive on purpose, because it doesn't want to send the keep alive very frequent, because there will be a lot of traffic also. So it will hold it for some time, but it will only send it when the lease, the client lease as well as the master lease is about to expire. So when it sends, then again this guy will send a keep alive immediately, okay, to the master. So then it will hold. So that way the master is controlling, and also the holding of the master is decided by the master. It can delay also. Okay. But now the case comes in for, yeah, let me complete his question. Yeah, let me complete. Yeah. So what will happen when your master dies in this instance, but your client has some lease. Okay. So before your master actually dies here, so this new lease has already started. So that lease actually updates the lease of client also. So you will still be in transit, and then there will be no master for certain time. Okay. But then when the new master comes in, okay, your client will have a lease too. But if this is expired, they call it something called a jeopardy period. And then after the jeopardy period, also you will have a grace period. So within that 2 periods, grace period also, if you still see any of the keep alive what this client is sending, if you get a response for it, then it will actually get this master, and then continue as if nothing has happened. So this jeopardy and the grace period is very important. And therefore, if you look at it, even the client is still continuing here. The master died down, but it is actually just continuing. But in this case, what will happen? The sequence number, yeah, the sequence number won't change for the master, but only I think the instance number might change because it's a new master, right? Yeah.
Yeah. It means that each our client has unique identifier, yeah, because we will have new TCP session with new master, yeah. So
Yeah.
probably each client has unique identifier, yeah.
Right. So you see, there are two things. One is you need to identify if the master is new, and also you need to identify if the process or the client has died down and coming for the same lock. So there are two ways how to differentiate. One is if we are the client side, if you crashed and again we came up with the same process, okay, because we crashed, it's like it's again our what you say, the containers, right? They come back again, so with the same client. So again it might send a request. So then how to identify, so how they are different? So that case actually the sequence number becomes very important. Okay. And the master phase, then I think the instance number is more important. Yeah, maybe I'll read more on that, because those things are also not very clearly, I've also not gone through it. but on a high level, it is this way. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So you had something to say.
Yeah. So here the step number 2, right? So the master is sending. So what is the 2 it is sending from master to the client?
Which one you are saying? This one?
Yeah.
Okay. So here what happens, so first, this is the first one is the keep alive, which is initiated by the client. So the client always initiates the keep alive to this particular session. So when it is sent, so the master will hold this keep alive. It has to respond. So for every keep alive, the master will respond back with an ACK. So this is like an ACK. It is just sending an acknowledgement.
Oh, just acknowledgement. Okay.
Yeah. And then again, this when it receives the acknowledgement, it will send another keep alive. Yeah.
Okay. So why master is holding for some time is not.
Yeah, the only reason why the master holds is because every time the keep alive acknowledgement is not very periodic, but it is controlled by the master. The only it is done for reduce the traffic. Because then if it keeps on doing like this, you'll have a lot of traffic with so many clients talking to the master. So everyone will keep on communicating and there won't be any time for the master to do its work.
So once master sends ACK, then client will send immediately keep alive again.
Yes, it will send. That is the only reason the way the session will be held. If it doesn't send immediately, then the session will drop down. Because the master drops down, sorry, the client drops down, it won't sell the keep alive, right? So the session has to be ended.
Oh.
So yeah, the session
Master
won't
will
end.
think client has-
Right. So the session won't end because it will at least wait for some lease year. But whenever the client lease expires, it gets a jeopardy period and the grace period, which we'll cover later. And that is the reason actually it takes care because when the transition is from two masters, it takes more time, the master election, right? So because it's a Paxos, in some cases it might take more time. So how do they take care of? They take care of the jeopardy in the grace period. So the clients actually have more work here.
I think grace period is like master waits for some time for the client to send another act, like not act, like what is this keep alive, right? If within that period it doesn't send, then I think master will consider that client has did something like that.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I'll go through that later. But here I just copied this because I was more focused on just talking about the keep alive. Yeah, because I didn't complete the other stuff because there are a lot of many things to take care of. Yeah, but what you say also makes sense. Yeah.
Can we discuss here? Please correct me, but as I remember, in case of Zookeeper, master issue keep alive, but here looks like each client is responsible to send keep alive messenger. Yeah.
Yes, this is actually initiated by the this one, the client.
The Zookeeper also same. The client only has to send the keep alive, right? Or else the session will get ended.
Yeah, because how will the master know who is the client, right? And what is the
Yeah. Because we have a connection, yeah, we have TCP connection to master, so master probably know full list of clients. Yeah, but let's say that it means that even we have ephemeral node, yeah, we probably have something like this, and I expected that in case of Zookeeper, if I created ephemeral node, Zookeeper will send keep alive packet to me, yeah, and if I will not respond, it will delete ephemeral node. But it looks different to here, please, or not.
See, I would say even Zookeeper or Chubby, both are sort of coordination services. So the coordination service has to be very lightweight. We cannot have more processing done on the coordination service. You think the coordination service is just a small repository, and which is very important repository. The only important thing about the coordination service, it should not fail. It should be very highly available. It should not fail. So in that case, if you put all the processing part, if there is bottleneck, and if it is not able to reply back to the client very quickly, then that will defeat the purpose. So therefore, I think Zookeeper also, if it makes more sense as per my understanding, because the client wants more information and the clients want to remain connected. It's not the master has to be connected with the client, because master has to handle many of the clients, right? So it is the client's duty to actually see if the session is maintained. So that is what I think it makes
Yes,
more
yes.
sense for the client to send,
You're
right?
actually right. So Zookeeper client said they will only send the heartbeats periodically to maintain the session up. So clients is not sending the session up continuously, the periodic one, then the session will expire in
Yeah.
Zookeeper. Same as here,
Hmm.
same as Chubby.
Yeah, but yeah, if Nick, I think that is the way at least I understand. But if you have something we can actually discuss, yeah, sure.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, it's clear now. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so this is the one thing, and I think Shashank, we have other stuff because all these sessions in the keep alive. If I take in the next session,
Yeah.
along with the caching, that will make more sense. And as I was also staggering behind when you guys were asking questions about the sequencer, I was not really well prepared. But yeah, I'll come more prepared for the next session. Sorry about that. Yeah. Yeah, but here the last
No,
one
no,
in
no.
the handle is the, yeah, sure. This is the last one I'll cover. In this handle, we have another information, which is the mode information. And so the mode is everything to do with whether it is what mode this particular log is created. So that is what it talks about.
So mode in this is read, right?
It provides a to allow the master to create itself its state if an old handle is presented to a newly restarted mode. That is what the mode means, mode information. And it is opened at the when it opens at the open time only. That is obvious. And it only allows the master to recreate its state if an old handle is presented to the newly restarted master. So because we have that master transition, right, from the old master to a new master because the old master has failed. So when it gets this mode information and the state inside this particular master is not initiated, so it says that's mode information, then it will try to recreate that state. It is just for the master to recreate itself, recreate the state. That is why this mode information is very important. So I think in this case, when we are here and then we have a transition here, so when we come back here, so whatever this lock was actually held for, so the new master won't have created the state. So in order, because these state in the sense, I think it is everything in the in memory instead of it being in the persistent storage, so that the data will be brought into the in memory, and that is why the state will be created, because it says this is a new handle, right? And then it says the mode is based on the old handle, so it will create the new state, and that is the way the transaction continues, something like that. Yeah, but that is also not detailed about what actually the mode information is really about. But I think the mode information usually should be whether it's what type of file it is, isn't it, or what type of node it has created, whether it is a shared node or if it is something like exclusive, based for each and every client. So that is the only state what it will have. Other than that, I don't think so it should have anything. But yeah, I may be wrong in that case. Okay, I think that's the only thing we'll cover for today, and
Yeah.
we'll look about the logs and sequencers in more detail. I also get all this information, right? And the sessions keep alive. Then things become more easy and interesting. Also, whatever we discussed till now, and then we have a lot of loose ends. We can tie down that, and I think maybe next session we should be able to complete it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that should be done.